data trash engineer, algorithm bias auditor, virtual identity defender. These aren't just words I pulled out of a hat. These are future jobs. The multinational digital operations company Cognizant recently released its Jobs of the Future Index, which explores trends and patterns in employment demand worldwide. These future jobs, Joy Adjuvant, esports arena builder, they seem on the fringe and may be wildly unregulated as they come into prominence. And so, the question is, what are the legal frameworks, regulations, actions, advisory work, and parameters around data trash or vertical farming? What legal minds are out on the fringes with these ideas and investments? Who is the legal lifeguard at these tidal pools on the edge of tomorrow? Traditional big law firms move slow. They're built on existing infrastructures and talent pools and aren't able to pivot, but solos and smalls, which are the majority of working lawyers and a much more diverse crowd, are paving the way in innovation and flexibility. So when it comes to being the first lawyers on the scene of a vertical farming accident or a meeting with a company's machine risk officer, it might not be your traditional suit showing up. It'll be the lawyers who've had to be scrappy and adapt the whole time and learn the art of evolution through gig economy, through alternative legal services, through the fringes and into the fire. Are you ready to evolve? Well, let's get to it.
LowSum, the podcast for law firms. Powered by ConsultWebs.
Welcome back to LowSum, the only podcast for law firms that will give you the space you need because we know it's the space you deserve. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain the legal community on the latest in personal and professional developments. I am Jake Sanders, the Chief Origami Officer. And flying this paper tiger of a podcast with me is Paul Julius, the PPC Cyclone. How's the click-through rates today, buddy?
I'm holding on as much as I can, but she's breaking up.
And you were there, and you were there, and
That's
you
right.
were there. Let's click our heels and tell people what's on the show.
On the show, we view the diverse future of gig law and discover how lawyers are finding success on the fringes. And then we interview lawyer and director of academic success at University of Tennessee College of Law, Renee Allen, and discuss where diversity, education, and the legal profession are headed. And as always, we ask Renee 5 questions we ask everyone.
Pull up a plate. It's the Hot Takes Buffet.
We have 2 dishes on the hot take buffet. First one's by Carolyn Elephant, the inevitable Carolyn Elephant on Above the Law. It's scholars flummoxed that minority lawyers can have high levels of professional satisfaction when they primarily practice as lowly solo practitioners. Legal scholars find in recent paper that minority attorneys have a higher job satisfaction, but unfortunately, most work for themselves. The legal researchers mention that solo practice doesn't have as much social capital as a big law gig. And so Carolyn Elephant believes that there's an element of shaming law firm owners in legal academia, which is odd, and that minorities are leading the way in gig economy because that's where they can dominate and they have flexibility. So the quote that she has is, "I'm no academic, but maybe the reason that minority lawyers are happier in solo and small firm practice is because of the opportunity it creates. Opportunity as in a 7-figure solo practice. Opportunity as in the ability to run for and win judgeships as a Black female law firm owner. Compared to options like this, working 60-hour weeks as a big law partner seems like a booby prize rather than a brass ring." What you think of that first one?
I mean, anytime we can use booby prize and flummoxed in the same intro, I'm gleeful.
Rightfully so, sir.
So this is something that you and I have discussed off and on with increasing frequency, I would say. We read in an article in a previous show, the information there contained, it said 2009, African-American lawyers represented 1.71% of law firm partners.
Oh.
Today, African-American lawyers represent 1.81% partners.
Right.
But what this article is kind of saying is that maybe they're starting to say, you know what? If I can't do it with you, I'm just going to go do things on my own. And they're having wild success.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't have to be join big law or get into a firm that maybe the mechanisms are there for success as a solo. In fact, maybe you'll be more successful in your community if you are more representative of the demographics of that community.
Well, and later on we find that there's a counter to it. The article you're talking about from Renwei Chung from Above the Law. Yeah.
Her name eluded me. Yeah.
I know. Yeah. So diversity in the legal profession has flatlined since the Great Depression or Great Recession. What I think we find out later is that the environments that Renwei and Renee are both talking about is still the perception of law schools in communities, diverse communities, educational communities. Like we find out later that, most law school recruitment, teams are only going to the top tier colleges. No one's going to city colleges. No one's going to night schools or, random places where there still might be somebody who's looking for it. So there's a problem of the access to law schools still that kind of is bottlenecking the opportunities for diversity. But as we're talking about, in partnership roles, in big firm, which is, Carolyn Elephant is talking about, these legal researchers are thinking the big law stuff has the big law feel and you get more social capital from it. And so you need to increase diversity at the topper tiers for there to be movement at the bottom. But there's everyone. Meanwhile, JDs are pumping out, and where are the jobs coming? What types of jobs are coming? So being adaptable, being flexible happens on a solo and small firm level. That survivability, the evolution, Darwinism is at play here. So the people that can flex and switch and move are going to be able to survive. But those people who are chasing for the ivory pie in the sky, as the slices get smaller and smaller, well, that's not where the diversity is going to be happening. But there still needs to be institutional help. There still needs to be law school foundational changes to make sure that happens. So it's complex, but I thought this was a great and powerful way to think of diversity and then change it because it's happening already. It's happening under our noses.
One thing I do want to point out in Caroline's article is it says lawyers who work for themselves aren't subject to the indignities and discriminatory practices of institution owned by others. But then she goes on to say the other reason the authors posit are frankly insulting, right? And one of the things she says is that most minority lawyers are driven by a desire to, quote, give back to their communities. On the one hand, I get where she's going because that's a sweeping generalization.
Sure.
I think a lot of people
on a couple sides. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, sure. But at the same time, I guess it really depends. I think you have to start to look at what those minorities are and where they are and what happens and where people end up practicing law. I mean, how many people in general are I go to city college, I get my degree, I stay here, and I don't move around. Like, how often does that happen? And I don't have an answer. I'm just saying, it's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. Mobility is limited for people. And so you have to be thinking about how are you creating legal professions and legal careers and legal opportunities for all different types.
There you go.
But when it can only come through a law school JD, that's where it's strangled. And then perception and then, cultural, identity. But Renee Allen is working with millennials and, she's teaching at law schools and she's seeing the way that diversity and inclusivity and the conversations are changing around the new crop of lawyers that are coming out. And they're going to be defining things in a different way that we olds are held up on. We're held up on what the definition of law success is. Is it that big law gig? Or is it your ability to give back to your community? Or is it your ability to continue learning and helping and advocating? There's multiple different goals.
But I think what I think is insulting about this article.
I'm insulted.
I'm insulted right now, man. The institution, scholars, law schools are flummoxed.
Yes, indeed.
That people can have high levels of professional satisfaction when they primarily practice as solo practitioners.
Yeah. Big
so
deal.
Are we saying here that if you don't make it if you don't make partner, that you should be dissatisfied with your law career?
And here, another link that we'll put in the show notes. Michelle Obama tells the truth about life in big law. She hated it. There wasn't opportunity. She actually says, I was looking at a pile of documents, and she said, well, there's no way I'm going to read all those, but she had to, and she didn't like it. So that was the classic definition of success. And it didn't, well, I mean, that's the first lady. I mean, things ended up pretty well for her.
I guess, yeah, it worked out. She didn't have to read those documents anyway, huh?
And she's on a book tour anyway. Okay, never mind.
So that's interesting, and I think it kind of leads us into the next article.
Yeah. Let's get into it real quick.
Because I think I think some of this is about personal satisfaction.
Right.
Whether you end up going on to be the first lady or a solo, or there's a certain amount of just straight up, I'm not from a traditional background.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get into school in a traditional way.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we're looking at, as we talk about later with Renee, some non-traditional approaches
mm-hmm.
to getting experience as a
mm-hmm.
law school student.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes you happy, because you're not going to keep doing something like Michelle Obama just demonstrated. You're not going to keep doing it if you don't like it, if it doesn't make you happy.
Yeah. So on Law Technology Today, there was an article, and it's the surprising findings, what actually makes lawyers happy. It linked to a book that was a 404 page not found, which I thought was funny. And then book. I don't know who wrote this article, but it says some really interesting things. Briefly, really, it should be called, the article should be called What Doesn't Make Lawyers Happy, because according to research, it's not pursuing the traditional path or achieving status. So here's a quote from the article. The resulting study of 6,200 lawyers and judges in 4 states confirmed all of these hypotheses so consistently that the conclusions are clear. The happiness of thousands of lawyers varied strongly only with personal factors such as their attitudes, integrity, relationships, and purpose and goals. The usual markers of success in our society and profession, those external competitive factors of grades, money, and prestige, were essentially ineffective for producing happy lawyers. This was in the New York Times. They talked about this a lot. So those traditional things, grades, money, prestige, doesn't make a happy lawyer, but they have to go through those things to get the JD degree. Can you see that it feels weird? I mean, and this is just the peanut gallery. Mm-hmm. Me and Paul, we ain't lawyers.
But so what? I mean, we're not lawyers. We're not lawyers, but you know what? How many project managers could say the same thing? Yeah. How many people in STEM? How many, civil engineers mm-hmm. are unhappy, successful as hell, pulling in 6 figures.
For sure.
I got a solid job. I will never have to worry about employment, and I am miserable.
So yeah. So what does it mean to be happy? And I think it means flexibility, and it means control, and that's what comes with solo and small, and that's what comes with kind of making your way in the world today. And I guess it takes everything you got. But yeah, so we get into it. Renee is an amazing professor, lawyer, experienced on both sides of delivering the law and also helping people become lawyers successfully. And this is I think it's a fascinating time to be a lawyer. I mean, honestly, and it's inspiring, and this conversation is another log on that fire.
Let's go to where everyone knows our name.
Light it up.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
I met Tanner, who works for Consult Webs, on a plane on the way back from Key West, Florida. And I'd just been thinking that I needed to do some more marketing for my law firm. So when he told me that he worked for Consult Webs, I was super excited. From the beginning till even now, I've been with them for almost 2 years, and the experience has really been great. Having Consult Webs on board is really like having your own team of people that really care about what kind of business you're getting. I mean, practicing law can seem kind of lonely. You always are wondering, how am I going to get clients? How am I going to make payroll? But with Consult Webs, it's not just me worrying about having people come in the door. They're there as well, and they've been so responsive. Since I started with Consult Webs, I have increased the number of employees double at least. And since I started with Consult Webs, the revenue has tripled. It's really been an incredible experience.
Go to consultwebs.com to learn more.
And now, for a LowSum interview.
Renee Nicole Allen is the Director of Academic Success at the University of Tennessee College of Law. As director, she develops and teaches programs designed to enhance the analytical skills required for success in law school, on the bar exam, and in the practice of law. Her research and teaching interests include educational psychology, millennials, critical race theory, and social justice. Before her career in education, Renee practiced family law in a metro Atlanta law firm. She received her BA from Mercer University, her JD from the University of Florida, and she is currently earning a Master of Science degree in educational psychology with an adult education concentration from the University of Tennessee. After interacting on Twitter about sketch comedy shows and digging into her research and papers, we couldn't be more happy to introduce Renee to the LowSum audience. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So explain your path to becoming a first-generation lawyer and to your current role at the UT College of Law.
So how far back are we going?
As far as it's applicable.
I was raised by a single parent. For most of my formative years, my mother was actually a college student. And so I grew up in a house where education was extremely important. And I've always had this kind of love for learning. I didn't always want to be a lawyer, but I knew everything I heard about law school told me that it would be challenging. And so I was up for the challenge. What I found when I got to University of Florida is that I really had a passion for working with people. So I'd spent most of my teenage years and throughout college working in customer service. And a lot of what I saw in my externships and clinics in law school was, again, just an appreciation for interacting with people from all different walks of life. So that led me to an interest in family law. And after I graduated from University of Florida, I had the opportunity to work in a really small firm in Metro Atlanta, where I was able to hit the ground running from day one. So not a lot of the typical first year new lawyer work. I was in the courtroom on my second day on the job. And so I got a lot of hands-on, really awesome client-based experience from day one. But what I missed was learning. And so I had been asked a number of times as a new lawyer to mentor people from family members and friends who were interested in pursuing a career in law. And through that mentorship, it really sparked an interest in legal education. I started to look at opportunities at law schools that kind of would suit that interest, and really fell into a teaching role. So I wasn't necessarily looking for a teaching role, but I absolutely love teaching. And so I've been at a couple of schools. I've been at UT Law since 2016, and just the opportunity to influence the education and the careers of the next generation of lawyers is, never a dull moment. It's always exciting. So yeah, it's kind of my story.
So you've written extensively on millennials and minorities in and outside the law school classroom, and you now work in placing these groups onto career paths. So what similarities do you see between these groups, and what challenges do you think they face going forward?
So I just both millennials and minorities have an appreciation for diversity. I think millennials, more than any other generation, have grown up with peer groups that look, very diverse in a number of different ways. So not just diverse in skin color. And millennials, because of that, are more accepting of diversity. I think minorities understand the importance of diversity. So those two groups, I think, are going to work together to kind of influence the future. I think a challenge, though, particularly when it comes to millennials, is, and I write about this in one of my papers, is that the color blindness aspect might inhibit their ability to have tough conversations about race, even though they care. And so that may be a challenge. But again, I think millennials are finding very unique ways via social media to kind of move the conversation really past diversity and more towards inclusion, which is where we should be moving.
Hmm. That's interesting that it's just a small change of words rather than focusing on diversity and talking about tackling diversity. It's talking about inclusivity and bringing it all in, because it's so odd. The peer groups are changing. They're becoming more diverse, but there is this kind of desire to want to seem, when you're talking about color blindness, can you explain that a little bit? Like, people want to feel that they're colorblind, and
Right.
that's why they.
Right. I mean, that is, and it's not, I think it's sincere, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily a bad thing,
Sure.
as long as you can acknowledge that, people are different. And some of those differences are socially constructed, like race, and they
Mm-hmm.
do impact how people experience the world. And so as long as you can not treat them differently because of that color aspect, but acknowledge that their experience in the world might be different from yours, then colorblindness is not problematic. I think one thing that millennials have done a great job of are creating these allyships where people of, millennials who have privilege and power or both, have really pushed the ball towards inclusivity by becoming allies for people who aren't in positions of power and people who don't have privilege, and speaking on their behalf and including those people in the conversation. So I think without their quote unquote color blindness, I don't know that you could get to that place. So it's not necessarily a bad thing as long as those differences that most definitely exist and are important are acknowledged.
And I'm also wondering too, do you notice a way in the way millennials and digital natives prefer communication? Are those conversations, you said they're happening a little bit more, but they're almost prismatically distorted on social media. Is there, do you see maybe changes in the way people are, the youngsters today, as you see them at the university? Is there a way that they're communicating differently, messaging or phone wise, or is there something that you see there that is challenging the conversation or making it easier?
I think the challenge is that millennials, particularly later millennials, are very insulated by their own peer group and their own generation. In order to see big change, the conversation has to involve other generations, and it's going to have to involve folks that aren't necessarily your peers. And millennials are somewhat insulated by their millennial peer groups. And so that's a little challenging. That's even challenging in education because I've gone to conferences and I talk with my colleagues, and we all have open door policies, and we're here all day, and we're wondering why students aren't coming. And I think it's because we aren't the first person that they're asking anymore when they're experiencing a challenge or having trouble understanding a doctrine. And so they're actually, because of that peer group installation, talking to each other and figuring out on their own, which there's something positive about that. But I think when it comes to social change and social justice, there's got to be some interaction outside of the peer group.
So breaking into more of the millennials and how people are behaving, I want to talk about the economic realities of the gig economy. Businesses everywhere are being disrupted. Banks all of a sudden are cafes. They're like a coffee shop now. I don't know what's going on. anyone can trade stocks. Anyone can drive a taxi. So in big law, it's legal procurement. Big investments go into legal tech. The majority of new lawyers are going it alone, solos, small firms. They're able to pivot. We start this episode with a story of Harris County judges, 12 ladies who ran for judgeships while they were owning small law firms, all Black women, and how huge that is and how transformative it is. And so the gig economy, do you think the ability to run a firm from your phone or just kind of go it alone, is that going to increase diversity in the legal profession?
I'm hopeful, but I'm also a realist. And I think that the pipeline for the legal profession comes from law schools. And so if those people who are hanging their own shingle are also reaching back and communicating with their own law schools or law schools in their area about diversifying the profession and mentoring, then definitely yes. But I'm not sure if that alone is really going to move the ball forward, because we're still only talking about a limited universe of diverse people coming out of law school. I do think it's great that you put a certain group of people, because of the gig economy, in positions of power where they can then use that power to influence legal education to do more about diversity. But just them hanging their own shingle or, running their own businesses alone is probably not going to be enough to really move the ball forward in a significant way, increasing the diversity in law. Sorry, is that not the...
No, I think you're right. Well, so now here's a counter. Potentially, as alternative legal service providers have shown on this show, we talk to people who are big businesses are changing the way they get their law on. And, I just need somebody to do document stuff. Or just like you said, I really like talking to people. Well, here you go. I need a lawyer to just talk to folks. Do you think law schools are changing the offerings from which do you see any alternative law school stuff happening that's helping fill in these gaps, or do you see some movement there, or is it just traditional JDs got to get pumped out? We got to change that. Do you have any flavors?
So I like being employed in legal education.
Right.
We'll start there. And I do think for the most part it's traditional JDs as usual.
Right.
However, there are a number of schools, actually University of Tennessee is one of them, that through law school clinics are doing some very innovative things. So small business clinics, entrepreneur clinics that are creating some opportunities for law schools to really interact with and engage the community in a way that I think could be very diversity centered. So there are some unique opportunities for that. I think legal clinics provide an opportunity for law schools to do a lot more of that. But as a whole, law schools are still mostly business as usual. I think the American Bar Association has implemented and is going to continue to implement over the next few years some standards for legal education that are going to require law schools to engage more in the marketplace of today, as opposed to the marketplace of 20, 30, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think that will do a lot to move the ball forward. Law schools should be in their communities. And I think that would help a lot with social justice initiatives and diversity. And so I think there is a lot of promise in the future and where law schools are going.
So not just in law schools, but I'm curious what you think in general. Jake and I have kicked this around a couple times about how maybe change, we shouldn't be looking to the ABA, or we shouldn't be looking to the, quote, industry. And it's going to be more like people looking around and saying, you know what, that's not working. It's time for us to do something else. And so maybe the real change is going to come from people who just straight up reject that. I mean, and I don't know, that may be a little extreme,
It's anarchy, bro.
That's what I'm saying. Break it all down. But I mean, seriously, there's a little bit of this kind of DIY. Like, I wonder if there's, an element to that of like, maybe that's not the way to do this anymore. And maybe because this diversity isn't happening through these traditional channels, it's going to be, it's going to be met by the fact that demographics show that this isn't what it's like anymore, you know?
Yeah. I went to a conference very early in my legal education career, and someone at the University of Denver, I wish I remembered their name, gave this presentation about law school of the future. And it really was going back to an apprenticeship model. The classroom component would take place for 1 year, and the 2 years would be an apprenticeship. And I at the time, I think everyone in the room kind of scoffed at that. Just, what are you thinking? But 7 years later, looking at what the marketplace looks like now and what technology is going to continue to give us the ability to do, I think that type of legal education program might better suit the needs of what law practice looks like in the next 50 years. So I don't know if sitting in a classroom for 3 years is the best way to get, the next generation of lawyers prepared for what future practice will look like. Wow. But I also don't know that today that a law school who opened their doors as an innovator in that way could stay open. There's been a couple experiments and they haven't been successful in the last 5 years. And so there has to be, and it doesn't have to come from the ABA, but there have to be enough law schools on board to support that type of change.
That's fascinating because we've had guests on the show who have used, and Jake and I have talked about it as well, comparing legal education and medical education. I mean, obviously not in the practical sense, but there's parallels. And the one thing that comes up every time is that when you graduate from law school, you're a lawyer. You don't do this specialization in this, that, and the other thing. And there's opportunities there that people point out, and we've heard it more often than not, that where, maybe in order to do this type of law, having to go through this type of training isn't the best thing. So I'm interested in this idea of an apprenticeship or an internship. Jake used the phrase like a residency, right, or something like that. I don't know. Maybe there's something there now, and there's so many different areas of law that are evolving and developing right now. IP law, cannabis law. I mean, stuff like that, where it just 10 years ago, it didn't even exist.
Well, and at the start of the episode, I'm talking about data trash engineer, algorithm bias auditor, virtual identity defender. I mean, there's a lot of legal jobs that are going to be existing that just didn't even happen like that. I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, think about the ones that are going away too. Like once we have driverless cars, what's going to happen to DUIs? There's a whole chunk of stuff that's just, and I mean, I'm not upset about it. I think from a societal aspect, that's great.
Right.
Oh, no.
But there's a practice area that's just gone.
Right. That's something we have to continue to have a conversation about. I mean, I haven't practiced law in 7 years. And so, but yet I'm in a position to influence folks who are going to be lawyers. And I'm a baby in my environment. So I do, I think we have to be open to thinking about how we can do this in a different way. One of the proposals that I saw that I think law schools might be open to is giving professors sabbaticals to go back out into the market and to practice. So if you haven't practiced in 10 years, it probably looks a lot different than it did when you were engaged. And so if law schools were willing to give professors a 6-month sabbatical, not to write a research paper, but to go back and practice, I mean, just imagine what they could bring back to the classroom and how they could influence then the learning environment.
Gosh, that's great.
Solve some of the access to justice issues, it's out there. It can happen.
Well,
I'll be one of the first people to take the 6-month sabbatical to go do
Nice.
that. I would love the opportunity to get back in practice and engage with the community. I feel somewhat disconnected from what's going on in the practice.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. And I think what another thing is how law schools can help the community understand what resources lawyers can bring and what legal rights they have. When I was a marketing director at an old personal injury law firm here in Denver, that was the biggest aspect. Just telling people that they had rights.
Right.
Doing the Johnson & Johnson shower to shower thing, going through that whole the ovarian cancer in the minority communities and going out there and being like, I'm telling you, we have proof that these people are bad. And you look like a McDonald's hot coffee lawyer to some people. They don't get it. Like, I'm not out here chasing this. I'm telling you right now, you have rights, and they don't get it. So it's a political thing. And that leads me to the final question, because we got to wrap it up. But I think at times it's hard to understand where we're at, like with diversity and inclusivity and what's a political conversation and what isn't, and what's a right and, what is just like an opinion. But we engaged first on Twitter, but you said something out of the blue, and you said, we didn't deserve In Living Color. And In Living Color, for those of you who don't know, is a groundbreaking 90s sketch comedy show. Keenan Ivory Wayans directed, produced, write, all Black cast, almost everybody except Jim Carrey and Tracy Gold. Arsenio Hall, like this is the early 90s, and how revolutionary that would be today to have that on TV. And you said that we didn't deserve it. And I absolutely agreed, because it was so amazing and so politically incorrect. I mean, there's no way that you could do.
It wouldn't be on today ever.
Half of those sketches is like me and Paul were dying about Fire Marshal Bill. It's
Homie the Clown. Homie the Clown would not be on TV today.
But it's a firefighter that's a burn victim survivor. And so talking about all your millennials who believe in inclusivity and diversity, it's like, I just think a lot of people don't appreciate the majesty of Arsenio and Keenan Ivory Wayans and that whole dynasty and stuff. And I guess my question is when it comes to handling diversity in law, and for our audience to just take something away, what do you think they need to understand, and how can they help? Is diversity in law still wearing MC Hammer pants?
So unfortunately, yes. Diversity in law is still hammer pants.
They're nice. They have the little tight ankles.
Yeah, I loved hammer pants. I had a pair of gold. They were like gold specs. They were, listen, you couldn't get me to stop wearing those pants.
Nice.
And I don't want to, I think it's important that we mention that there's been a lot of progress made. From the late 80s to the 2010 or so, the minority enrollment in law schools more than doubled, and that's important. So it's not that we haven't made any progress, but we haven't made enough. 4% of lawyers are African American, less than 2% of partners are African American. So we still got a long way to go. Thinking about In Living Color and being a Zennial, or technically a Gen Xer, I was raised in a very conservative Christian household, and I probably was too young for In Living Color, but I was exposed to so many things on that show that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. I think millennials have that, right? Like they have the benefit of that exposure in their generation. It's just a matter of what they do with it. How we take all of these wonderful, great things about them as a generation, and not really we, but how they take it and how they harvest it. There's a lot of talk about pipeline programs in legal education. I think we've got to start digging into some different channels. Most law school recruitment events are at four-year colleges and universities. very few. I actually don't know of any that go to community colleges or 2-year programs, or, not everyone starts in that very traditional route. And if you keep going the traditional route, you're probably going to keep getting what you've always gotten. And so I think millennials, as they start particularly to enter legal education, in different roles, administrators and as professors, will probably have a lot of ideas about how we can diversify law schools, which would really influence the profession. So I'm excited about what we're starting to talk about Gen Z coming to law school, but that means that we'll have also more millennial law professors. And I'm excited about what that looks like and what that means for not only for diversity, but also for inclusion.
So how can people learn more about you, Renee?
So they can find me on Twitter, where I met y'all. My Twitter handle is Prof. Allen Tweets. And then if anyone's interested in reading my scholarship, they can find me on Dr. Google, Renee Nicole Allen, and the article should pop up on their host site.
Five questions we ask everyone.
What was the last book you read?
The Hate You Give. Give? The Hate You Give.
Gaven.
All right. That's good.
Yeah.
Number
Powerful.
2. Yes. What is your favorite place?
Anywhere that I can shop.
Nice. I love it. Number 3. What sites, blogs, newsletters, or podcasts do you regularly check in with?
I'm an avid reader of Above the Law, the Faculty Lounge, pretty much any legal education, anything, I'm there. All the Law Prof series I'm on, probably more than enough.
Number 4. If you were stranded on a desert island and could only pick one condiment to take with you, what would it be?
Oh, that's way easy. Chick-fil-A sauce.
Oh, nice.
Chick-fil-A sauce can
That's
go
good stuff.
anything.
It
Nice.
really
Like,
is.
Leaves with Chick-fil-A sauce.
I
on
use
that.
it as a beauty product.
It's
I use it as like a nighttime eye cream. And I'm telling you. Woo.
All right. And now to get that picture out of your head,
Sorry.
question number 5. After a long day or a long week at work, how do you relax and unwind?
I bake. So baking is my stress relief.
Any
Nice.
favorite?
Oh, I bake anything. Cake,
Really?
pies, cookies. You guys should give me your address. I can, send you a package.
Done.
I'll take you up on that. I'm a huge fan of chocolate chip cookies.
Okay.
Just throwing it out there. Cool. That's it. We made it to the end. Thank you for answering 5 questions we ask everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
For show notes, links, and info, go to thelawsumpodcast.com or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.